Good morning, Mr. Horndasch. It's a pleasure to have this interview with you. And my first question would be, you talked about the electrification and digitalisation of mobility in the future. What are your main takeaways in this regard?
I think the key point is when we talk about electromobility, it's one of the largest transformations we've seen over the last decades, really, for us as the end users. And I guess people are not ready yet in terms of making that shift from classical combustion engines towards electric or electrified vehicles. And that's something that requires to be communicated and well organized. And I think this is currently not the case because you've got so many conflicting messages coming through. And that's very tough for the end user who is not so much into the details of automotive, and it's very confusing. Digitalization is something which is very important. It is happening. However, the OEMs try to sell us their story of digitalization, which is really a closed garden, essentially. And if you compare it to the other internet giants that we see, like Amazon, you've got an open platform, you've got one login, and you've got a whole plethora of services that you could use, and that's not the case in automotive. The technology is there, and I believe that innovation will come from outside rather than from the OEMs.
This year you released a study about the electronic car market in the German-speaking part of Europe, as well as the opinion of the end users. What were the results that surprised you the most, and why?
I think the most interesting finding was that there's a lot of confusion out in the field. The key difference of our survey towards others really was that we in particular picked a segment of participants who are currently in the process of buying a car within the next 6 months. So I think that was certainly different. So those people, they have made an effort to investigate various options. So about 70% said, oh yeah, I could see myself buying an electric car. However, there are certain hurdles out there, like infrastructure, like cost, very unclear. And we sensed a high level of confusion at that end. And I think that was the key lesson learned. We talk a lot about the hurdles, but other examples like in the Tesla community show that for the broad mass of the population, this is not the case. They feel confused and they have a need for more information about electromobility.
You mentioned that there is a lot of confusion or misconceptions in the market. Which one of these would you say are the most impactful ones?
I think the biggest misconception is that one size fits all. That's how it's currently communicated. You know, you've got one car and it should be capable of solving all mobility needs that you have as an individual. I think for this time, it's not possible. We talk a lot about the range of electric cars, and that's certainly the case. But if you look at the majority of use cases of people out in the field, they just use their car to get to work or to do some sort of local things. So I think the question of reach is not the tremendous issue there. But it's getting confused. The other thing is that even though everybody talks about electromobility, a lot of confusion exists around various other alternative technologies like hydrogen, etc., which is sort of brought up in various discussions. And I think that does confuse people. So where should I put my money? How safe is my investment? And how do those new technologies work? I better stay with my combustion engine, right? So those are the things which really cause the confusion.
What factors prevent e-mobility from going mainstream?
It's the question of where can I recharge my car? It's a question of what does this transformation mean for me personally? How does it feel? What's the experience? What's the user experience behind? I mean, we're so programmed towards if I require more fuel, more reach, I just go to a filling station nowadays, whereas tomorrow it will be certainly different. Plus, we will have some regulatory issues, especially in Germany, for instance. If you live in a sort of apartment block and you've got some car park there, it's not so easy to get a wall box installed due to regulations, fire regulations, etc. And that needs to be changed very quickly. And likewise, of course, in the public, things need to change. And probably we get to that point also is to move away from a centralized energy supply towards a more decentralized model.
And how do the consumers' opinions differ regarding electromobility when we look at different segments? For example, are there differences between the rural and urban population, or between under and over 30-year-old consumers? Could you find some specific consumer segments?
Well, actually, the study was not geared towards sort of identifying special needs for various segments, but from discussions and other sort of surveys that we were involved with, it is quite clear that in terms of age, I would rather raise the age from 30 to 40. So the under 40s, they are probably much more open towards electromobility. You also have the group of the digital natives there, and electromobility is something which is broadly accepted, and plus the willingness to accept a different way of using a car. The other big difference, of course, is that in the rural area, maybe electromobility is not so much seen as an option. There's always the risk in terms of reach, etc., and infrastructure, whereas for urban areas, it's more accepted. However, there's the big hurdle, of course, where could I then recharge my car? In public, private, whatever. But that's sort of the key differentiation between both segments, between urban areas and rural areas.
What do you think? Which players are actually capable of providing this vast charging infrastructure, and who should actually do it?
Well, if we take today's concepts, I think the idea, of course, is that the energy supplier would be in charge for making sure that charging infrastructure is provided. I think that model is probably not a sustainable model, because you've got so many stakeholders in the game. You've got probably municipal areas, you've got, of course, the energy suppliers. And I think a lot of the burden will be taken maybe by companies providing car parking spaces for their employees. You've got the private segment where you have your own probably infrastructure. And again, if you move towards a decentralized model, it's something that you can provide yourself basically in your home, to have some storage for energy, but also the option and possibility to recharge your car, for instance.
With what kind of business models could the e-mobility market be successfully conquered?
Existing models, I mean, they assume that you pay for an amount of power that you consume, that you purchase somehow. And that's something, if that is meant to finance the huge amount of investments required, be it centralized or decentralized, this won't work, essentially. So I guess one point, of course, is subsidies from the government of some form, or municipals, where we say certain investments are covered by the public sector, for instance, but that won't be sufficient. So I think what we will see is new business models towards opening the ecosystem, electromobility, power supply and generation, and couple it with other industry segments and sectors, so that revenues and money from there flows into this entire ecosystem, and helps to sort of subsidize any of those investments.
The digitalization of mobility shows many faces and offers many different opportunities, like autonomous cars, smart cities, car-sharing apps, just to name a few. Which of these concepts would you say are actually capable of reducing traffic jams and environmental damage?
I think the answer is all. I think there won't be a single technology, a single concept that sort of prevents us from the next sort of collapse of traffic. I think it's the combination of all of them. The question only is, how do you apply it? And still, tomorrow we'll have a very individualized demand for mobility and traffic. And whatever the solution will be, or the combination, the mix of those, will determine the level of acceptance. How individualized could I use any of those means, and what does it then also mean economically at the end of the day? But I think, per se, the autonomous vehicle won't help us to reduce traffic. I mean, it's a means that takes away some of the burdens of driving, especially in traffic jams, etc., and sort of makes it much more convenient. However, I think that one projection might really be true, that it increases traffic, because then you have autonomous vehicles trying to find parking spaces, etc., and that will certainly increase the pressure on finding solutions. So I guess it's the openness and it's the attractiveness of such mobility ecosystems that give me the choice and the comfort sort of to remain as an individual in my needs, in my demand, but at the same time be able to move from A to B. I think that's the key point. So I think mobility will be required in any way. People won't stop being mobile, but I think overall it's the combination of solutions that we find there.
What factors benefit the vision that in 5 years' time there will be a significant amount of autonomous vehicles on our roads? And what factors contradict that vision?
I think the main arguments towards autonomous driving is efficiency. I can make use of the time whilst I'm in the car and supposed to be driving. And the second is safety and security. I think that's one of the things. Whoever has ever experienced at least partially autonomous car and how it assists you in sort of your driving activities, I think would say that's fantastic. That's something we want to see. So I think those will be the drivers towards autonomy in terms of technology. However, certain questions need to be resolved in terms of insurance. What will happen in case of an accident? Can you really audit the quality of software within a car? Do you know what kind of configuration it has? And can you then also backtrack in terms of what led to a certain situation that caused an accident with potentially a fatality? So I think that's something we need to look into. It's a new level of quality assurance required, which we don't understand now, but we have to develop such capabilities.
How many years will it take, in your opinion, until augmented cars will reach a market penetration of, let's say, 5%, 25%, and finally 100%?
It's very hard for me to predict a graph that suggests as of when we are going to have a full penetration. But let's start differently. We're going to see that the average age of a car from production till end of life is 18 years. So if we take the assumption that all cars delivered today are fully autonomous, we would still have a situation for the next at least 18 years of a mixed model there, which makes it very hard. So I guess the question and the transition will sort of be something that we have to deal with over the next 25 years.
How would you summarize all the topics that we talked about just now and all the impressions we got from this conference? What are your main takeaways?
I think a lot of innovation is happening, in fact, and people are eager and willing to sort of experience those innovations in their daily living. However, after the visit of the International Automotive Fair, I felt a bit grounded in terms of what is there in tomorrow's product. I saw a lot of companies with great ideas, which I think they would add significant value to my personal experience in mobility, in driving a car and using a car. But that will take a long time until it make their way into the main products. So we see a number of players sort of trying to circumvene that sort of closed ecosystem car. That's definitely one thing that will be more often visible on the roads. And the other thing is that the market forces play an important part here. And I think that the Asian companies, in particular China, they will create a huge momentum in terms of new innovation, digitalisation, because they don't have to deal with the type of legacy that other OEMs have to deal with. And they will certainly be a game changer. And competition will certainly drive the business here in Europe as well. So something to be looking forward.